This episode is brought to you by The Guarantors. Chasing down residents who don't pay their rent is taxing enough. Did you know you could offset the risk of renter default? Meet The Guarantors. They'll requalify your applicants and insure their rent. If the resident doesn't pay, you still get paid. Visit theguarantors.com/multifamily today.
Hello, welcome to the Rooms with Ronald podcast, brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Ronald Harrington. In 2023, I set an intention to shop 100 apartment communities to see how leasing was evolving around the country. Rooms with Ronald was born out of that experience. In this series, I share my experiences and engage in meaningful conversations with other professionals in the industry as we discuss all things related to leasing and marketing. Join in as we expand the Rooms with Ronald experiment. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Rooms with Ronald. I'm your host, Ronald Harrington, and if you're just now joining us, well, you're in for a treat because this podcast is everything about leasing and marketing. I am joined today by my dear friend, industry legend, woman extraordinaire, Suzanne Hobson, who is the founder and principal of Here to Elevate. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Wow, Ronald. Yes. Thank you for having me. And that was quite an intro. Thank you so much.
That's what you sent me, right? That's what you wanted me to say?
Mine was a little bit longer, I thought.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I had to cut it for time's sake. You know how that
I get you. I get you.
Suzanne, I am so excited to have this conversation with you because we have lots of great conversations and it's about time that we recorded one to let the listeners in. But my biggest pet peeve when I go on site is I hear a leasing agent tell me, but I'm just a leasing agent. It's like sends chills down my spine. Like I just think of like the teacher taking their nails across the chalkboard every time I hear that. And we as an industry have to get better about getting that mindset gone and kind of changing that because they're not just a leasing agent. They are everything about this business. I know you have lots of firsthand experience with this kind of thing. So where do we start? Where do we start with this?
Well, I think we start with what is sales, because I think that's where the misconception starts and what type of industry we really are. Are we a sales industry where we're selling a service, or are we just building apartments for investment purposes? And I think those two mindsets are what have put in motion either the salesperson feeling or the leasing consultant feeling like they're worthy, or if they don't.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And two is like, I think part of our problem is that we, as an industry and outside of the industry looking in, we kind of look down on the leasing people, right? Like we treat it as an entry level position, and it's so much more than that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I know you're familiar with my story, but I started out in the industry a long time ago. And at that time, I was called a phone girl. They didn't even want to call me a leasing consultant because I hadn't quite even gotten to that entry level. I was sort of below that. And I knew that if I wanted to move up, I had to learn how to lease, but there wasn't a lot of value placed on that career path. I knew that I wanted to get to a certain level. So what I said to myself was, okay, I'm going to do what we've traditionally done, and I'm going to go into the different roles and I'll get promoted. And that's how I'll get to where I ultimately want to be in my career. And what I found very quickly was there was a lot of great things that I could do with sales and with marketing. And maybe I wasn't as strong in certain aspects with other parts of the business. And so I felt, compelled and pulled in one direction. And I wasn't really rewarded for that. It wasn't a good thing. It was better for me to just sort of mold myself into what I knew it was going to take to get that promotion or get ahead. And it was really discouraging. And I had to work really, really hard at the things that I wasn't really great at. And, again, I can talk hours about gifts and talents, and I'm sure we'll get into that part too. But yeah, I had a bad taste from the get go.
I think for me, like when you like talked about getting promoted and like starting out as a phone girl, right? Like we have this really defined career path in multifamily, right? Like you go from a leasing agent to an assistant manager to a manager, right? And it always starts at the leasing agent, which is the bottom of the barrel, right? And so for me, I kind of went along that path a little bit. Like I was a leasing agent and then I was like the director of student marketing because they were going through a reposition. And then I became the assistant manager and the leasing manager, all because I still had that leasing side. And then became the community manager. And I will tell people I was not a great community manager. I did not like having those like conversations with people, those tough conversations. Why they also had to add the leasing manager title to my assistant title, because I wasn't going to be the AR person who collected and posted rent and did all of that. Because
Barking.
every time that someone would come in and their parent, someone died. I mean, I remember one time I asked a resident, and don't do this, I'm not like promoting this. How many more grandparents are you going to have die? Because this is the fifth one in the year.
Oh my gosh. Oh no. I think I've heard it all now, Ronald. That's like awful.
So not the best act, right? But I just didn't have time to like put up with that kind of like thing.
Oh
So for me, I was just like, let's not, but I think this is where this mentality starts, right? Is like, well, I'm just a leasing agent. I can't make that decision.
Yeah. And I know that really bugs you. And it does me as well. I think, and I've spent a lot of time working towards getting recognition for leasing consultants and marketing that side of the house, because it's not the easiest job, but it is a very fruitful job. We bring in a lot of dollars to the bottom line. And many other companies do recognize that sales is a very important part of an organization. There's really only three parts, right? There's sales, there's operations, and then there's back office. If you look at any industry, any company, that's really how you break it down. And not one is better than the other. You have to have all three functioning to be really successful. What happens sometimes in multifamily, and again, it's different at every organization, but what they'll do is they'll stack them. So you've got, either sales or back office at the bottom and operations here. And what ultimately happens is one area of the business gets neglected. Probably will have the highest turnover. Probably will not have the maximum rents that we could possibly collect, which affects the bottom line and revenue if we don't treat that part of the engine as importantly as all the other parts.
Yeah. I stay in hotels a lot. And as I was preparing for this conversation, I started to look around hospitality. That's where I got my start at, right? I worked at the front desk, and then I got promoted to a sales coordinator position, and there was like people know in hospitality, there's all these different things. So I needed a late checkout. And like I normally do, I'm speaking or I'm at conferences. So I'm just trying to, find the time to get the flight. So I go to the front desk in the morning at 7:30 in the morning. I'm like, hey, is it possible for me to have a late checkout? They're like, oh yeah, what time do you need? I'm like, would it be possible to get a 1 or 2 o'clock late checkout? They go to their system. The first thing they always do is they always look at your status, right? Where are you at? Are you like, what's your reservation? And then they come back and they make the decision. It's, for me, it was, yes, you can have that late checkout. And I got to thinking, this is just a front desk associate, very similar to our leasing people, who had the authority and the ability to grant me that wish. However, something like that in multifamily would have went down like this. I don't know. I need to go ask my manager. So I think the first thing that, we have to do is start to empower the leasing teams to, take the ownership of that.
Gosh, that's an excellent example. And I see that all the time, especially in my prior role when I would go out on site and, even just the simplest things, less than $50 decision, and people would be frozen because they aren't allowed to make those decisions. And so, to your point, I think empowerment is so critical for our frontline people to be able to meet the customer where they are. And especially today, where people want it fast, they want it inexpensively, they want it safely, they want it as valuable as they think that it is. And so if there's all of these rules and regulations to making a resident happy or a prospect happy, we're just getting in our own way.
Yeah. I remember last year I was at a conference and someone was talking about the Disney experience. That was their whole session theme. But they said that they allow their leasing staff at each property to have a $200 budget per month to do things for prospects, for new move-ins, right? You just like found out that someone's moving in, they're coming straight back from their honeymoon and moving into a new apartment. So you can take this $200 and maybe you're going to go buy $25 in flowers and have it in their apartment, which was like I was like, it's $200, right? Now that person, if you did that for someone, they're going to post about it on social media. They're going to like make this big deal about it. And now your leasing teams also have to work together, right? Because it's a pool. So, you're like, hey, here's what's going on. So it opens up that communication as well, which I thought was a brilliant idea. Like, okay, so $200 a month, that's $2,400 a year, which isn't not that lot. We can find another place to cut that to give our staff that empowerment. Like, oh, hey, this is my first time renting. I want to do something special to you. Or in the service recovery, because sometimes we drop the ball, right?
It happens.
It happens. We didn't respond to the email. We got that angry person in there. If I knew I had a little bit of a budget and someone came in and they're upset because my tour is double booked or the self-guided tour didn't work, and I knew that I had a little bit of wiggle room, I could just go pull a $10 gift card to Starbucks and say, your next coffee's on me. I think we would see a little bit different, kind of mentality of I'm just a leasing agent.
You hit another great one. And, the other thing that it promotes with all of the other things that you just said, it's the leasing agent who knows the prospect best. So they can really customize that gift or offering to what that prospect or resident wants, and it not be a canned gift, right? We're all used to the canned gifts.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the pizza parties internally for our
we
site.
made $1 this month, guys. We're going to give you a pizza party.
Yeah, I know, right? And so you gotta look at that too. And I love what you said too about being proactive when you've dropped the ball on something, to be able to just go ahead and fix it before it becomes an inflated problem. Again, that's empowerment, and you're not giving away the bank to be able to do that.
Yeah. And I think also it would help if I know that I was going to have to choose a gift for a prospect. I'm going to get to know them.
Yeah.
On the journey, right? Instead of a prospect coming in and treating them like a number, get them in and get them out. You sign a lease or you don't. If I know if you move in with me, now it's my responsibility to pick something out for you as a welcome gift or something like that. I'm going to take the time to get to know you a little bit so I know what I'm getting, right? So it's not just the blanket, and we have to, as an industry, stop doing this, like the plunger and the toilet paper, like that's not a moving gift, right?
It really isn't. It really isn't.
I used to tell my staff, like, we don't do that because to me, this screams, you're going to have a problem with your toilet. Please don't call me. Like, see yourself.
Right. And I know we've both been on podcasts as of late that are talking about what's really most important to the resident. And it's not whether or not you gave them a plunger, right?
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you on that. And I think too, when we look at, and I'm sure you're going to get into this, but when we look at the sales, trajectory and where leasing and sales are going, there's a lot of question out there still about, what happens to me next? Am I going to get stuck in that role where I'm, the receivables person and I don't have that in my DNA?
Yeah. I think let's just jump in right now. I think we have to get better. And I think for so long, and you come from a company that did this, right? Centralization are, as some people are calling now, specialization
Mhm.
opens up these career paths for these salespeople, these people that are hungry.
Mhm.
So I think that's where we start.
Yeah, I agree. And there's an operator out there. I won't name him. I've been naming him lately. I promised him I wouldn't continue to utilize him. He's great though. And what he basically is doing is he's monetizing speed and quality. So those two things, speed and quality. And he's doing it at every touch point of the organization. And the other part to your point, in the way we reward and the way that we say, you're doing a great job, isn't what the rest of the world is doing, what in the way that we structure our commissions. But I'll take a step back because that's the money part. We'll get into that, I'm sure.
Yes.
The part
And
about the DNA, right?
yeah.
What makes a great salesperson? And we look at what makes a great assistant manager. We look at what makes a great, manager. These are very different skill sets. And so what we did is we basically took a step back and said, what are the skill sets of a great leasing consultant? And we isolated those traits, and we gave accountabilities that were in congruence with those traits. And then we let them fly. And what happened was low turnover, great results. We kept 96% of the units occupied that were ready. Just going to put that little caveat in there. They were ready to go. We suffered a little bit in other parts of the business, but for sure the sales team was extremely strong. And I think it's because that was our guinea pig group, and it's not always the guinea pig group. And I think, to your point, specialization, it's been really in the assistant manager role and some of the other roles. But this one in particular, we thought, wow, and it was part of the pandemic, but it was also, how can we really reward people based on how many units they can rent? Still the traditional model. We had 1 per 500 units. Now, we did have to have people on the ground to do the tours. We found that we couldn't just go 100%, virtual. We needed to be able to meet every customer where they are. But for the most part, the heavy lift, the back office, the real relationship building could be done remotely. And so that was a big thing that we did. And I think that first part of the DNA and saying, if we could really put people in a role that they thrive at, that they love all the things that they're doing 85% of the time, do we think the results are going to go up?
Yeah. Like, we talk about development. It's so funny to me that we hire for that career path, right? Like, you can't be an assistant manager unless you're a leasing professional in most positions first. You have to have some sort of this like credibility as we go up. So for me, I think like what I find very interesting is we talk about empowering our teams and like getting out of this mindset is that we will bring people to come and sit with a manager. Most companies will have someone go and train and onboard with the manager or the assistant manager and do all that. But a lot of companies have done away from with sales training. And they're putting them in front of a computer and saying, take in, through your LMS, take this sales training. And there's no in-person sales training, which to me, like as a leasing professional, if you were to send someone into the property to sit with the manager and you spend a week with them going through your checklist, doing the onboarding, someone's coming into the assistant manager and saying, this is how you scan checks or this is how you send notices. And I'm not getting that attention and that training to do my job. I say, so I'm just a leasing agent. So I don't have the tools to need, and you don't value what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you hit another great point, which, ultimately comes to, I'm just a leasing agent. We should I don't know, start the, oh, are you just a leasing agent? No. But yeah, to your point, again, I think that there's a lot of on the job where we see the devaluing of the role. And that's a perfect example of that. We don't treat it as special as maybe some of the other roles, or that we feel like it doesn't need that attention. And it has one of the largest liabilities if we don't follow fair housing.
Yep.
Again, it'll affect your revenue if you're not teaching people how to properly close by demonstration. not by watching words on a computer screen entirely. Um, we've lost that modeling of this is what it looks like. And I'm doing this because I remember who trained me, right? Her name was
Yeah.
Vicki Roth. I'm just going to put it out there. She's fantastic. But she would work with all of us, and I wasn't allowed to take a prospect until I passed. And so when I passed, I was like, yeah, I passed. It was really important. Yeah. So to your point, I think that's something we really need to go to work on. And I'd love to hear, about companies, and maybe they can head to your LinkedIn and put some comments on your page. I would love to hear what out of the box things people are doing and start really promoting those things. Like what kind of impact is that having on the business? Because, and we're probably going to go here next. How do we convince, the ownership, or who's in charge, that it's worth spending the time and the money in investing in our frontline people?
Yeah. I think for me, like I never had that mindset, but I had a really great first boss and I was really lucky. And she, she would came in and this is how I still explain it to this day, right? Like the manager always gets the credit for driving the bus. Like, this is the person driving the bus. And she goes, but as a leasing professional, what no one will tell you is you're the wheels. So I can have someone driving the bus, but if my bus is sitting on concrete blocks, we are not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's great. I love that.
Yeah. So like you are probably more important than the driver because you're the one that's actually getting us to where we need to be. You are the money. And we would have discussions every day. We would talk about how many apartments we needed to rent, what that added to the value of the property, here. And we did cap rate expenses. Like we had financials. Every leasing person had the monthly financials. We went line by line in the income section. Here's where you had a direct impact. Here's, when I said you want $1,000 off, she would sit down and do the math with us on the pros and the cons of that. So for me, this is my first job leasing. I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone does this. This is so great. Like, I get to make these decisions. And then I went to other companies and I was like, you don't do this? Well, I think that's a great takeaway right there, is like getting people, let them know what the value is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the math. I think that there's a stigma sometimes with sales that, they know about the commission, but they don't know about what makes that important. And that's so false. It may be our fault because we're not showing the math, but it's hugely impactful. It's like the why, right? And when people skip over the why, you're just sort of a robot now. You're just doing the job and there's not really reasoning behind it. And so how well are you going to do the job?
Right. I would go in and say, like, which sounds better? I'm a leasing agent, or I brought in $1.1 million in revenue to my property.
Well, gee whiz, Ronald, I don't know, but I'm going to say it's probably the latter. That impresses me, I'll tell you.
So if I knew the impact that I was bringing in on a yearly basis when I was talking to people, because we could ask, well, you're a leasing agent, what do you do? I answer the phone. As my mom used to say, you sit at your desk eating bonbons with your feet on it, waiting for people to like come in, right? So, having just that knowledge. And I know there's some companies out there that do something similar. They'll do like a president's sales club and you get ranked and you can like see it. But I think to me, that is probably the easiest way to get someone out of the mindset, is to show them the impact that they're having on the bottom dollars. Because all we hear is we have to cut expenses. We have to cut expenses. We never hear about this is how much money we're bringing in. This is how much money, this is how you're contributing to our shared success.
That's totally true. You just reminded me of someone that I spent some time with at the Happy Co conference, and she blew us all away. She basically built a sales department, and she had varying levels in that sales department, but she had sort of the back office sales and then the front office sales. And then she paid them like a really low base, like super low base. And she incentivized them. And she told me they're the highest paid people in our company. They make over $100,000 a year. Now, she's a larger operation,
Right.
but her concept was really spot on, right? Which is reward people for the work. Because here's one other, and I can just put my owner hat on for a second and look at it and say, when we're not winning the entire game, it's really hard to justify paying the commissions if we're not getting the occupancy. And that happens. We just pay the commissions and we're not really looking at the end target. And all of a sudden we've paid for less than stellar results, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that, in the scheme of the whole picture, and I'm kind of skipping around, but what you said was really important. It's the whole picture. If they know what their part is, and they also understand what the other people contribute and what that looks like, it almost creates not only competition, like healthy competition, but accountability.
Yeah.
That financial meeting that we used to have once a week or once a month on site, and the manager would get the financials out and we'd all have to go around and talk about our 4 lines that we own. That was accountability. That was us having to say, I've just really had a crummy month, and this is why. I'm back on track, or this is what we're doing for marketing to help out that situation. Because now, in certain circumstances, I'm sure this happens, and maybe you can speak to this. You'll ask somebody, well, why didn't you meet your goals? And they'll be like, well, it was their fault. It was that department. And so, yeah, I'm getting a little into operations, but it is a big picture, and they're just as big of a part of that as everybody else.
Well, when we talk about hitting goals, I've learned that a lot of times people don't know what the goal is.
Yeah.
Or it's a number, right? So it's so funny because we were reading this book for work called The Culture Solution. And in there, he talks about how athletes have the easiest job because they always know where they stand, right? I can look up on the scoreboard and either I'm winning or I'm losing. And it brought me back to my, when I was a manager, I hated the goal board in the back. You know what I mean? Because I didn't understand the purpose of it, right? It was but now thinking about it, now I know the importance is, right? It's not the goal board. It's the importance of here's where we need to be at. But the problem is it would say 96%. Well, how do I get to 96%?
Yeah. Yeah.
How many move-ins do I need to get there? How many move-outs do we have coming? What's my net? And in our leasing training where I work, we do a whole exercise on calculating the 1%. And when I do this, I'll always ask, do you know how many apartments it takes to rent to move the needle 1%? And it's they get fear in their eyes, like deer in the headlights. I'm like, it's okay. You can say no, right? I didn't know either. And we do the math, because then once you start talking math, it's crazy. But, when I used to work with our friend McKenna, she had a whole Excel document for the 6 weeks out. And she would put in the occupancy. She would go and put how many move-ins and move-outs, and you could see it. Here's the number of move-ins you need each week to hit your budgeted occupancy. Yeah. It was the greatest document that there ever was, because it told me I need 8.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then next week I could go in and see it, and I didn't get 8, I got 6. So now I need 10 this week to make up for it. And it was that visual.
And why don't they have these in the tech, in the software? How cool would that be if you could go in as a salesperson, leasing consultant, and look at your dashboard every day and go, oh, yep, I got to get 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that. And it's kind of by the way, I know that tool that she was using. And I still use it with one client right now.
I still have one that I use here, so it
works.
It's
but do you see what I mean? It's not part of any software package. We actually have to do that calculation outside of the system. It drives me nuts, because it's one of the most important ways to motivate someone. Yeah. When you can tell them in the present, because that's typically where our people are. They are here right in front of the customer.
Yep.
This is what you need to do today. Okay, great. I'm on it. And then it becomes a little bit competitive. Gamification too, I think, is really important. Having fun with this stuff.
Well, and for me,
when you're not winning.
There are some softwares that you can pull that report, but I need it to be interactive. I need it to be, what if it's this?
Yes.
What if,
Okay. Mhm.
we get to 90% in 2 months, and like I can go in and I can put in the numbers. I mean, we have a pro rate calculator and all softwares and a move out. Like we have all, so why not can I just say, here's where my numbers are, here's how we move it, and it calculates, and I want to put in the goal, because maybe it's 96% at the end of the month, but I'm curious to see, okay, what if I get to 92 on week 2, and then I
Mhm.
can go in and like, okay, so now I have a couple more weeks. I don't have time to sit down and do that on pen and paper, right? Like,
I
so
know. I know. It's a great method, and I hope someone's listening.
I want to know. I want you to put on your operator hat,
Okay.
and I want you to like you're the owner, right, of a community. How do we get that buy-in from that level?
Well, I'm going to say this because now that I'm where I'm at in my life and I have a lot of road rash and I've seen a lot of stuff. I don't think I necessarily believed this when I first started out, but it's really hard to change somebody's mind when they've made it up.
Yeah,
You can influence it, um, but I think the more owners embrace that sales is really important, they can see the correlation to the bottom line, then it just becomes, well, I want to be better than the next operator who's done that, or the next operator who's done that, or I'll be able to get more deals because I operate this way, or I'll have less turnover. And it's not because that's a bad way, it's a business and you have to run it like a business. But I think that a mindset is really hard to shift if you have someone that doesn't have that capability. There's a lot of great leaders or owners that do. They're always looking for the next best way of doing something. And that's who I would want to work for,
yeah,
and that's because they're always thinking about how we're going to make it better and the importance of all the people on the team, not just one segment of the team. Um, but I do think, and we've talked about this, Ronald, that when you approach your regional or you approach, their boss, whatever, however that looks in the hierarchy, and you want to plead your case about why you might want to do something different, you have to do the math. You have to show them based on how they're wired, not how you're
yeah,
wired. And so if you've got a boss that is, numbers driven and they're more head than heart, that doesn't make them a bad person. It just makes the way that you communicate with them even more important. And the reverse, if you have someone that is really, dedicated to resident service and they're thinking with their heart and maybe not as much with the data, then you can look at your surveys and see what an impact can be made by elevating the front line and the people who are doing the work with the customer. I don't know. I think it has a lot to do with who's at the top. And I
yeah.
also think it has a lot with how they're wired and how you approach them with something that is outside the norm.
And I will say, like, if you're listening and you are just, the you're a leasing agent and you're on site and you're feeling like you're just a leasing agent and you don't have any of these tools available, reach out to either one of us. We're definitely happy to share any documents that we
Mhm.
have that we can help create this. But it's as simple as you can do an easy Excel with your move-ins for the year, how long that they signed, what their monthly rent was to get the total dollar of that lease value. And you can add it up at the end of the year in Excel. Pretty simple to say, I done this. Or if you don't care about the dollar amount, but maybe you want to know how many people you've personally moved in, you can keep track of that and say, out of my 400 unit community, I moved in 200 of it. I'm responsible for 50% of occupancy on this property. And waking up every day knowing that will give you that little, like, you know what? I'm not just a leasing agent. I'm responsible for half of this occupancy. I am helping this property succeed.
Yeah. And I think I'm hearing you say something else that I think is important to highlight, which is the confidence and knowing that again, the data is very helpful when, you're feeling like you're not succeeding in something and you're able to look back and say, this is my contribution. This is what I did. I should be in the room. Like I should be, where I'm at. And this is a good place to be. I think that's, intrinsic of all of how we should work and respond to people who, again, ourselves, right? Like it's really the confidence. I think that has to be there too. I just recently read something that you posted, and it had to do with, the AIM conference, and something you said really reminded me of this and the importance of being well-rounded too as a salesperson, leasing consultant, leasing agent, and making sure that you are also a marketer, right? Like to a certain extent, you might not have all the digital expertise that an official digital marketer might have, but if you're doing that too, I mean, that is an amazing, set of skills that really, if you're looking at the DNA of each role, not a lot of other people have that.
Yep.
And so really working and honing those skills, I think is also really important so that you've got some real bang when you're in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, we are out of time. I told you we have conversations like this for a long periods of time. But if people wanted to reach out to you, where do they find you?
Oh yeah. Well, you'll see me on LinkedIn. I'm Suzanne Hobson. I'm right up there. I also have my website, which is heretoelevate.com. And yeah, I've got all my contact information posted just about everywhere. So yeah, reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you.
And if you love her wisdom on here, she actually co-hosts her own podcast show, Decoding Multifamily. So you can definitely catch her little nuggets of wisdom by listening to there.
Thanks, Ronald.
Not a problem, Suzanne. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've been so excited to have this conversation with you. I hope that the listeners found it insightful. I hope that it motivated somebody on site to say, you know what, I'm not just a leasing agent. You're right, Ronald. You're right, Suzanne. I am more than just a leasing agent. I have to shift my mindset to remind myself of that. And you're going to help. If we can do this across the industry, I bet you I would lay a good wage down that we would see a reduction in turnover. I would agree with you, Ronald. And thanks for all you're doing for our whole sales, department. You're really setting the example in many areas of the business, but it's really good to have an advocate out there. So thank you. Perfect. Well, thank you guys. And until next time, everyone, happy leasing.
Thank you for tuning in today. I hope I left you with some fresh ideas or a new perspective. Leasing and marketing are evolving rapidly, and Rooms with Ronald is committed to offering a place to hear about those changes. We also celebrate and acknowledge the fundamentals of exceptional service that will never go out of style. So, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, or subscribe. Visit multifamilymedianetwork.com to learn more about our other exceptional industry podcasts, thought pieces, and sponsorship opportunities.